Alrighty, so we went over all the hormones, all the basic hormones, but let's now dive into each individual hormone and look at what they do and why we care about them. Now, the two coolest hormones, the funnest hormones to go over are epinephrine and norepinephrine. I really need to learn how to write better. Let's see if I can make this better. Yeah, a little better. Okay, epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, epinephrine you can just call adrenaline, which I'm going to call from now on. Actually, no, I'm not. But adrenaline, you can call that. Adrenaline and norepinephrine, which is called noradrenaline. But you don't need to know that. Actually, you might need to know that because he's very tricky and likes to ask tricky questions. Epinephrine and norepinephrine, or adrenaline and noradrenaline. Now, these are called the catecholamines. Really mean the same thing, catecholamines. Now, if you remember where the catecholamines are released, I'll pause a little bit so you can answer. Where are the catecholamines released? The adrenal cortex or the adrenal medulla? Okay, I don't know what you guys just said, but if you said adrenal medulla, excellent. These are released from the adrenal medulla. Adrenal medulla. So the adrenal medulla releases catecholamines, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. When would you release adrenaline? We all know what adrenaline does. It increases your heart rate. It increases your energy level, causes you to have more energy, do unthinkable things or things you never thought you could do when you exercise. When you start exercising, like lift a car, lift a building, whatever. So it causes you to do these crazy ass things. So your body releases epinephrine, which I'm gonna call epi from now on. So epi, it's part of say epinephrine and norepinephrine. Really, these are part of the sympathetic nervous system or sympathetic system. I'm not going to say nervous system. So it's the fight and flight system. So what they do is during exercise, we know what they do. They increase your heart rate. They increase your stroke volume, increases the contractility of your heart, which increases your cardiac output. It increases your glucose level, your energy level. It increases a lot of things in the body. It's fight and flight system. Now, epinephrine, norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is mostly a neurotransmitter. I don't know why he calls it a hormone. It's very confusing. But since he calls it a hormone, I guess call it a hormone. Now, how does it cause these effects where you increase all this stuff? Now, before I talk about the receptors that it acts on, let's just talk about very simple of how epinephrine increases your blood sugar. Because we know how we don't really care about how it increases heart rate and does all that stuff. So we're going to talk about how it increases your blood glucose, or how it increases your energy level. Now, if you remember back from the first test, you have something called glycolysis. Glycolysis is essentially how your body uses blood sugar to produce ATP. So essentially this will lower your blood sugar, produces energy. You have another thing called glycogenolysis, which if glycolysis is the breakdown of glucose, glycogenolysis is the breakdown of blood glycogen, or glycogen. Now, if you remember, glycogen is a storage form of glucose. So if you're breaking down glycogen, you're breaking down like your storage form, so you're getting more glucose. So a really good example is think of a bank account. Say you have $1,000 in your bank account. Now, this is synonymous with glycogen. So say you have 1,000 glucose molecules. Now, if you withdraw from the bank account or glycogenolysis, you break down the glycogen, you take out money from your account. So say you take out 500 glycogen or $500. So you just increased how much money you had, but you lowered your glycogen stores. It's the same thing with glycogenolysis. You decreased the amount of glycogen you have, but you increased your blood glucose. So epinephrine mainly causes glycogenolysis or breaking down the blood glucose. Now, its other effects of epi and norepi is it causes vasodilation and vasoconstriction. This just means increases the width. Actually went over this on the second test. Vasoconstriction, vasodilation is increasing the width or diameters of your blood vessels. Now, again, I think we went over this on the second test, or I went over it. I don't know if he went over it. Is what receptors it acts on, whether it causes vasodilation on certain receptors or it causes vasoconstriction on certain receptors. Now, it gets tricky because there's different receptors in the body. Epinephrine can cause vasodilation and vasoconstriction. It's very confusing. It depends what receptor it acts on. When epinephrine acts on a beta receptor, for example, because it can act on a beta receptor, beta receptor or an alpha receptor. Because remember, going back to the previous video, I talked about cells having certain receptors, and then the hormone acts on that receptor and causes a certain effect. Well, the receptor is what drives the effect. The receptor really tells the cell what to do. So if epinephrine binds to, say, a beta receptor, and if it binds to a beta receptor, it goes through a second messenger system, which by activating something called adenylate cyclase, or it's a second messenger. Adenylate cyclase. But if it activates on a beta receptor, what happens? Guess I really didn't say what happens if it acts on a beta receptor. I just talked about in my study guide that it binds to adenylate cyclase. Okay, let me just read my study guide really fast to see when it was going to cause vasodilation and vasoconstriction. The biggest one is circulation, blah, 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 never cause vasodilation, never cause vasoconstriction. Okay, that's very confusing. I'll get to that one in the next video when I review this a little bit more. But epinephrine normally binds to beta receptors. And norepinephrine binds to alpha receptors. Now, epinephrine can also bind to beta alpha receptors, but it normally works this way. Norepinephrine binds to alpha receptors, a certain receptor called alpha-2 receptors, or it can bind to something called alpha-1 receptors. So the main thing I'm basically saying or trying to understand or trying to get across is epinephrine binds to beta receptors on cells, and norepinephrine binds to alpha receptors. So again, just read the study guide or ask more questions, but because essentially I don't have a grasp on this yet about what causes what, but essentially we're talking specifically about vasodilation and vasoconstriction on beta receptors and alpha receptors. Now, since this video is kind of short, we will cover something else really fast about percentages. Now, our body mostly produces epinephrine. We produce about 80% epinephrine at any given time. It's mostly epinephrine, because adrenaline's awesome. And we produce about 20% of norepinephrine. Not really a lot. Now, when we start exercising, our curve of exercising looks like this. This is our intensity of 0 intense, 75% intensity, 100% intensity. Now, when we first start exercising, I'll do two keys, norepinephrine and epinephrine. Epinephrine will be a dash like this. Norepinephrine will be dots. Now, what happens is we produce mostly norepinephrine at the beginning of exercise. And then when we get to about 75%, we start producing epinephrine. So we produce mainly norepinephrine first, and then we produce epinephrine. So really, epinephrine is not really produced till 75%. And norepinephrine really, you release norepinephrine around like 50% of exercise, probably right here, and you always release norepinephrine, but it's mostly epinephrine. So that's just a simple, when you release epinephrine versus norepinephrine, simple definition. Mostly you release norepinephrine at 50% exercise and it continues and increases. It's a little iffy whether it's 50%, but you start releasing, the point is you start releasing epinephrine after norepinephrine. So everyone can attest to this when they exercise. You really don't start getting adrenaline and start getting that second wind until your exercise has been pretty intense or it's been pretty long, so your intensity is pretty high. So that is pretty much that.